Good morning and welcome back to meetrabbits.org. I wanted to touch on today a topic that is almost a little taboo in meat rabbit circles, and that is the topic of whether or not to buy rabbits at auction. Most people are going to tell you no. I'm here to argue the point that maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. So if you look around, you can see that my cages are pretty empty. My numbers are low. I have actually recently shipped out 15 animals through a local livestock auction. And again, I know people have a lot of strong opinions about this, and I feel like there are people out there who probably wouldn't ask or even bring up the subject or even say that they have or would purchase a meat rabbit at a livestock auction. And so this is one of those instances where I feel like I do have some experience with this and I should speak up, because yes, I understand all of the reasons that those opinions stand, that a lot of people say, don't buy your animals from the auction, you get what you pay for, all of those things. I understand it. I don't even necessarily argue completely against it. I'm just saying that it's probably a more nuanced consideration than that. So let me start off by saying that when I first started in meat rabbits, my meat rabbits came from a local livestock auction. One of the reasons that I believe that this is an option that people should consider, but considered with some informed knowledge behind them, one of those reasons is that one of the hardest parts about getting started in meat rabbits is actually finding rabbits to start with, to find breeding stock, to get some breeding pairs going. And that is because, as we know, as meat rabbit raisers, they are a less common livestock animal. Depending on where you live, they may be more or less common. They may be more kind of socially and culturally acceptable. But for a lot of people, there just aren't enough breeders around to locate stock. And if you do locate stock, let's be honest with the fact that not all privately sold stock is quality stock. Some of it is, most of it probably is, and some of it isn't. And, for those people who would say you get what you pay for, I would say, yes, that's true. And you should be prepared to kind of overcome some humps as you get your breeders going and kind of get your program going, weeding out those good and bad animals. But again, let's be honest, people go through over these same hurdles with private stock as well. So I think the more important thing to be talking about is, coming prepared with whatever knowledge you can bring to the auction. Hopefully you would have some time to view the animals and evaluate them before the sale begins and have an idea, take some notes, write down which animals look good to you, which animals you are interested in bidding on and potentially buying, and to the best of your ability performing those health checks that you should also be performing on through a private sale, through backyard stock, at a show sale, breeding barn, what have you. Wherever it is, you should do the best that you can to evaluate the health condition and well-being of the animal. Now, hopefully, if you're at a reputable auction barn, they also are going to have at least some cursory health checks. But we also know that a lot of things can kind of hide in rabbits. Again, going back to a backyard scenario, rabbits might be perfectly healthy and in good condition at the breeder, but then once they're moved and they undergo the stress of the move, of a new feed, of a new housing, new situation, things could be lying dormant that may or may not pop out in those animals. So again, this is where I say that even a a sale, even from a very reputable breeder, is not always a guarantee. So again, whether it's private or auction, you do the best you can to inspect the animals and see what you can tell from their health and appearance, especially things like nose and eyes and body condition. You may not be able to handle the animals, but these are things that you can probably see if you can get close enough to have a good look. Conditions of the ears, mites, as we've talked about many times, ear mites, they're not the be all and the end all, because they're kind of one of those things that everyone's going to deal with at some time. However, if you come into an auction barn and those rabbits just showed up this morning and their ears are all crusted with mites, that's something that's been brewing. That is not something that just happened that day. So that would be an indication to me that that rabbit probably wasn't really being observed and cared for as well as it should have been, because a mite infestation that's that advanced should have been caught. So, getting back to this, do the health checks, do what you can. Now, a lot of people will say, don't go buy breeders there because they're probably someone else's culled breeders. That is often true. But there are other reasons that people would send rabbits to an auction barn, and I'm a good example of this. I sent purebred champagnes there, and I know a lot of people might cringe, but we have some things going on personally. I know I do not have time to process these animals. I didn't want to not breed my breeders because I want to keep them productive and producing to the best of my ability and keep them healthy. But I also don't have time and room to be processing meat right now. So the better option was to send these rabbits while they were young, so that they had a potential for whatever use they're going to be. There will be a lot of cull buyers at auction houses, and I know that, and I know I can't control the fate of those animals. Hopefully some got picked up and maybe would be used as breeders. I did not send anything that I had any history of any serious illness with. I only sent healthy animals. And that's me trying to be responsible. Hopefully the other people that are sending are equally as responsible. But again, understanding that there are cull buyers there, I would suspect that some of those animals went for probably pet food, and possibly other meat uses. I really don't know. I can't say. But it was a good way for me to move some animals quickly, reduce my numbers the way I need to be. You can see I have a couple that are actually due today. Actually, I believe Peony's up there giving birth right now. So, I've got more up and coming, and then we'll get back to breeding later in the summer and fall, and I'll have more room again. But, I did get a little bit of money for them. Certainly not as much money as I would get from a private sale or selling things as potential breeding stock. But again, it was about management, and this was the best management option for me and my rabbitry right now. So, yes, people are sending their culls there, and the older a rabbit is, probably the more likely it is to be a cull for a reason of age, possibly poor performance, infertility. So my advice would be maybe stay away from the older rabbits, maybe lean towards the younger rabbits, the 8 to 12 16-week-old rabbits. You may not entirely be able to gauge an age from an adult size rabbit, but hopefully, again, with a little bit of knowledge and experience, you could, to the best of your ability, even if that's just gained online, you could kind of tell something that's a younger rabbit and has more potential. And the reason I say that is because a younger rabbit, to me, is probably more likely to be there because someone needed to move some animals, someone needed to reduce some numbers, and possibly that's their actual planned sales outlet. But, those younger ones are not probably there so much because they failed at something where the older ones might have been. And again, the older ones could also be retirees, so that would be a reason to stay away. Now, a lot of people are going to say you get what you pay for. Definitely could be true. But let's think about this, because what you're paying for is something that's probably half or less of the price of a rabbit that you're buying from a private sale. So I might say that it could possibly be a good idea to buy twice as many rabbits as you plan on getting, or at least an extra doe or buck or two. That way, if one doesn't pan out, you have more option and opportunity to select out and, gain through reduction and selection to gain some good breeders. And I'll say, again, I started out with animals from an auction and I had mixed results. I had a doe that was older and never bred. And again, that's where I say go with the younger ones. I had a set of 4 young New Zealands and a Californian, a breeding age Californian buck. And through that ended up being what I selected through. That's where Holly came from. That's where my original Californian herd buck came from. And I had some excellent results with those animals. Holly was small, but she threw big litters of great growing big kits. So it all worked out in the end, and it was a process of selection. But I caution to say that you have a process of selection no matter what you're doing, including private sales. I've bought these champagnes after about a year or so after I got my feet under me with those original auction animals. I decided I wanted to add some kind of better quality lines in, and I invested in some Californians and New Zealands, and I had my share of troubles, mostly with the New Zealands. I did have a Californian that came in and after a few weeks here, she didn't have a constant sneeze, but she would sneeze with hay. And I decided, hey, that's not a trait I want in here. I got a litter out of her, and then I culled her too. So again, there's no guarantees, but it should be buyer beware, but it always needs to be buyer beware. And if the only option available to you, or you feel like your better option, is to work through an auction barn, do what you can to research the auction barn, see what people's opinions are. Check them out on Facebook. The auction barn I just sent mine to, I looked through what their posts and their policies were, and that kind of told me a lot about their handling and expectations in the barn. And I was comfortable with my animals going there. So, unpopular opinion, a little bit controversial. I'm here to speak up for those who either want or need to purchase through an auction to get started, and say, hey, you're not alone. And yes, you can have good results. And by the way, you can also have less than stellar results, even by investing in purebred stock, even from some of the most reputable breeders. So it happens. More on this topic in an accompanying article at meetrabbits.org. So hop on over there and check that out. I list out more of the things that I think that you should consider if you're going this route. Some of the actions after you buy at an auction, in other words, quarantining, possibly preventative health treatments. Maybe you go through a round of chlorotoluene, that word I can never pronounce, just to kind of prophylactically treat for mites and parasites, get you on the kind of the best foot getting started. So there's more of that in that article. Come on over there and share your experiences in the comments here and your opinions, but please keep it respectful. I really do not want to see anybody get castigated on here for saying that, they might buy an animal at an auction. There are a lot of reasons why animals end up at auctions, and they're not always bad. So buyer beware. Let us know your comments there. Hop on over to the website, see that, and I will see you on another day.